I hear actually from some parents of college students that they're worried about their kids, um, you know, buying into some of this propaganda that they're seeing because it's being forced down their throat every day. And that's really, really tough.
Welcome to Candid Minds with Dr. T. I'm Dr. Tamir Aldad, addiction psychiatrist and CEO of Mindful Care, the first ever psychiatric urgent care committed to providing affordable and accessible mental health care. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be discussing anti-Semitism and mental health. A lot of these topics tie into any form of discrimination in mental health, but particularly with what's going on in the world, we thought it would be very timely to discuss anti-Semitism and its impact on the mental health of individuals. Mental health, particularly when it comes to watching traumatic events in the news, isn't something new. But what we're seeing and what has been changing is our access to that information. And professionals who provide therapy and mental health care have a term called compassion fatigue, where eventually throughout the day, as you're hearing a bunch of people's stories and engaging and being authentic and showing empathy, it becomes more and more difficult and taxing on the clinician. And at a high level, that's called compassion fatigue. But what we're seeing is that individuals could also experience compassion fatigue, meaning if you have access to social media and you're constantly seeing real-time information regarding atrocities around the world, there's only so much you could tolerate, and eventually it could impact you and lead to fatigue emotionally as you are trying to process that information. So what we discussed today is a little bit about what that really means. How is anti-Semitism developing and changing, and what impact is it having on mental health, and particularly what's going on now in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and current events, what has changed, and understanding if there is anything that could be done to protect oneself from a mental health perspective. Personally, as someone who runs a fairly large mental health company, it's difficult to wrap my head around everything that's going on, be present, and create a work environment that's welcoming for our staff, our clinicians, and our patients. At the end of the day, everyone has an opinion about what's going on. Everyone feels one way or another. And it's difficult to not bring any of that into the workplace and not to allow that to impact the therapeutic relationship that you create with patients. There's something called a therapeutic alliance and establishing rapport with patients. And if you're unable to do that because of your own personal biases, that impacts the success of the patient in therapy or in their entire mental health journey. And it's very important that we stay very aware and be very present and very mindful into how we think and how we're impacted by situations. And if personally anti-Semitism, discrimination, current world conflicts are impacting an individual, that cannot enter the therapeutic relationship that you're establishing with a patient and that rapport that you're trying to form, which is very, very important to a patient's success. So we'll be exploring all of that today, and I'm excited to talk about these issues. With us is a good friend and well-known activist, Lizzie Savetsky. Lizzie is a well-known Jewish influencer. She has been an activist well before October 7th, supporting and speaking out against anti-Semitism. And since October 7th, with what we're seeing on college campuses and Jewish students feeling at risk, her job has been even more difficult and she's been even more active. So hearing her perspective in terms of what she's seeing on the ground and how students are currently coping will be interesting. And we also get a little personal. And Lizzie shares with us her journey with sobriety and some of the personal experiences she's had as somebody who's in the spotlight with anti-Semitism. So I'm excited to welcome her to the show, and I think it'll be a great conversation. Thank you for joining us. I have Lizzie Savetsky with us today. She is a well-known influencer and Jewish activist, certainly doing a lot of great work in the last couple of months, advocating and getting people to understand the importance of awareness and increasing awareness. So it's really a pleasure to have her on the show. And we met a couple of years ago, and then since then I've wanted to talk to her some more one-on-one. So it's really a great opportunity. Lizzie, thank you for joining us. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. So, yeah, it's great to see you, even virtually. I, yeah, I stepped into this role as an activist in 2021 during the conflict in Gaza. I just saw how when Israel was attacked and then retaliated, how immediately the world opinion, the media, social media turned against Israel. And I saw how anti-Semitism rose in conjunction with that around the world. And I just felt like I needed to do something. And I had this platform and I decided to devote it to standing up for my people. And, it's been incredibly rewarding, also very hard, particularly the past 5 months, 6 months have been really challenging. I was in Israel on October 7th and, knew when I was sitting there in the bomb shelter with my family that I had a big job to do because people were going to be looking to me for information, for, inspiration. And so I hit the ground running right when I got back 2 days later. And I've been going nonstop, protests, rallies, speaking all over the country to different Jewish groups, college campuses. And, it's been really heavy, but also feels really good to have purpose in this moment.
No, absolutely, it's interesting. You seem to accomplish a lot in one day, which is remarkable, right? That all that work you're doing, and we're seeing a ton of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and that's nothing new. I would say even when I was in college, it was something that we had to deal with, and earlier in this conflict, there was a lot of momentum among college kids to advocate and attend events and have debates. Um, and it feels as though there's some sort of emotional, maybe compassion fatigue that's happening where these college students are losing faith in the process. And you've been a real beacon of hope and a beacon of light for a lot of them. I'm curious, are you seeing that? And what exactly is it that you're seeing in the shift in the way that these college students are advocating?
The further away that we get from October 7th, I think the harder it is to fight this PR war because people are now so focused on what's happening in Gaza. And so first of all, I just want to say I have so much love for every Jewish kid on a college campus right now. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not how it's supposed to feel. This should be the most fun years of your
Yeah.
life. And it's just, I can't imagine what they're going through. But yeah, every day they're walking into this situation where they feel like the world is against them. And, we're becoming more and more removed from the initial tragedy is not even an appropriate word, but massacre that
Right.
started this whole thing. And I think, it's probably very hard I mean, I hear actually from some parents of college students that they're worried about their kids, um, buying into some of this propaganda that they're seeing because it's being forced down their throat every day. And that's really, really tough. On the flip side, I will say, I was just invited to speak at a rally at Cornell that's coming up. I still am in touch with a ton of college kids that are at Penn, that are at NYU, who I was working with even before October 7th. And, they're in it. They definitely feel isolated. They definitely feel like the administration says all the right things and doesn't do anything.
Hmm.
But they're not giving up. And so my goal is to just be there and support them, and to show them that, this fight is very far from over. Our fight, our PR fight, and our support for our people. And if we lose steam, there's nobody there to pick up the pieces because we really are the only ones who are out there doing it. And so we have
Hmm.
no choice but to keep going.
No, absolutely. What's interesting is that we're also seeing individuals that there's no denying that the images coming from the conflict on both sides are heart wrenching, right? And it seems appropriate to elicit compassion and empathy. What do you tell these college students that are starting to feel conflicted with they're seeing both sides suffering on both sides, um, and they're internalizing a lot of that. And as someone who runs a fairly large mental health company, I'm starting to wonder if they're torn, right? And there's almost this
Mhm,
dissonance that's happening between trying to listen to the other side, seeing the images
mhm,
from the other side, knowing that there's also an identity issue, right? That are you Jewish? Are you Israeli? Are you pro-Israel? Where are we drawing the line?
mhm.
If you put all that together, it creates a conflict, right? And it creates that dissonance. How do you recommend these students untangle all that and navigate it?
It's really hard. And I think, we are compassionate human beings with big hearts, and we don't want to see anyone suffer. Um, and that's exactly what they're trying to do here, is to play in on that human nature that we have, our compassion, and to make us feel bad about what's happening, and deflect from the fact that this is a war that Hamas started, that
Hmm.
Hamas is responsible for. Hamas is endangering their own people, not allowing them to leave and go to safety, depriving them of food, stealing the aid, selling the aid. This is, I think, we can't get distracted by the images, because that is the psychological warfare that's happening here. And it really is so effective. And we have to remember, what this is all about. This is all about dismantling this terrorist regime, which is only oppressing not only our people, they're not oppressing us, but attacking us, but they're also oppressing and attacking their own people. And so, for the greater good of humanity, we have to keep our tunnel vision in place. And it can be really hard to do. And you can feel horrible about these pictures that you're seeing and feel compassion for the people that are suffering, but also still remember who is to blame, and that is Hamas.
And that requires a lot of training to be present and mindful and aware of where what your position is, and put things into perspective constantly, which is really important. And speaking about perspective, one thing that was interesting about your stories is a couple of years ago, I know you were going to be on the Real Housewives of New York, and a lot of people were very excited and thought you would have really interesting perspective, and be a great mix. And that turned south. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you as to what happened and how you navigated it, particularly how you didn't internalize some of the criticism you were receiving. And I think there's a parallel there to what these college kids are experiencing, because eventually
Yeah.
if you hear every single day people saying the same things to you,
Hmm.
unfortunately, you start wondering if they're true, which is very scary. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, when you went through that, and the show didn't work out. Curious what happened and how you navigated it.
Yeah. I had this vision that I would be able to use this as an opportunity to gain a wider audience, to spread my message, which has always been about education and love and inspiration. Um, not that I thought that I would, not that I was naive enough to think I would be able to do that on the show, but just, having more eyeballs on me and my own content.
Sure.
Um, and it just became very obvious to me immediately that I was just going to be a target for so much hate. And Bravo was receiving hate. Andy Cohen was receiving hate simply for casting me. And so the last thing that I wanted to do was add to the problem of growing anti-Semitism. And I also felt like it wasn't right. I really believe in intuition, and knowing when something feels wrong and something feels bad. And even before I had started filming, I felt like this narrative, or my words and my message is too precious to put in the hands of somebody who is simply looking for drama and entertainment value,
Hmm.
especially in a time like this. Like, I can't tell you how grateful I am, particularly after October 7th, to not be on that show, to not be bound by that contract, because, um, I need to be able to say whatever I need to say and not be muzzled, not be at the mercy of a
Hmm.
network and a production company. But
Sure.
yeah, it was really challenging. I think I went through a couple months where I didn't really want to get off the couch and I just kind of wanted to um not that I was like in a clinical depression or anything, but I think I was just processing what had just happened and
Yeah. Well,
kind of grieving.
and I was just going to say that there's an appropriate level of grief that comes with
Yeah.
losing something that had such hype like,
Yeah.
for you, and then the rapid decline is the loss, and that's exactly what it is. It is grieving for sure.
Yeah, it was like this year build up
Yeah.
even more. And then and it was like grieving what I thought could be, what I realized wouldn't be, and trying to figure out my next steps. And I didn't
Hmm.
I always knew when I parted ways that this was my path. It was always my path.
Hmm.
And it was just about getting back there. And it's crazy because like I started to get validation immediately, like from the universe. Like the mayor reached out to me 2 weeks after to
Wow.
like and invited me to come. I was getting all sorts of different opportunities in the sphere that I wanted to be in. And I was blessed that I was able to immediately pour all of my focus into what I actually wanted to do. And so, it was hard because the fallout was, having your name in the press constantly, not knowing what people are not, and I never talked about it. I never told my story because I just felt like I wanted to move on.
Mm.
And I think that like I I didn't need the world to know the truth. I knew the truth. And that was enough for
Yeah.
me.
That's
Um
huge, and you had the strength to do that, and it almost served its purpose, right? Like you were able to extract the good from it, which is a skill that we talk a lot about in therapy, is to reframe a situation that is quite toxic, similar to
yeah,
what you're describing, and we see that also in patients, and being able to find that silver lining and reframing it so you turn it into good, and you allow it to re-energize you, and you find some level of positivity, which you did, and that pattern also exists in your life. I mean, your resilience is something that is inspiring, and this is just one example. I think another is your years of sobriety, which
yeah.
congratulations
Thank you.
is not easy, and requires constant reinforcement, and is a testament to your resilience. I'm curious, do you pull on those skills often? And what are those skills that maybe some of our listeners can benefit from learning about?
Yeah, if I had gone through the experience with Real Housewives when I was still in my active addiction, it would have been a completely different experience because
Exactly.
I had no tools. Like, you know, I think for somebody like me, an alcoholic, the only way that I knew how to cope with anything that became too big to handle, good or bad, was to drink.
Reaching for the bottle,
And
for sure.
yeah, and so, it required a lot of time working on figuring out new ways to cope, understanding that I'm not alone in this, that this is, something that a lot of people suffer from, because you do start to feel like terminally unique, like you're the only person in the world
Yeah.
who's ever gone through this, and nobody understands. And it's just not the case. And having support is huge. And I wouldn't have gotten through that whole time or anything that I've gone through October 7th, for example, I
Mhm.
without tools, without support. Um, and for me, like working a 12-step program was a huge, it really showed me the things in my life that are triggering, that, my patterns, which for me is people pleasing,
Mm,
and, my need for external validation. And that's something that, I just put so much pressure on myself. And it's something I still struggle with, that I still every day have to really fight against, because I have a really hard time saying no. And
mhm.
I have a hard time also with negativity, but I think that's human, and in the world that I'm in, I need to have a really strong exterior to be able to continue going. But I also think it's important to realize, when it's time to take a break, when it's time to pull
Mm,
back, when it's time to call someone for support, because this is a marathon, and we
yeah.
have to be able to figure out things to sustain us.
No, absolutely. And your level of self-awareness and insight, I think I wish that for many people, right? Because it's not easy, but being able to even identify when you're at your threshold, or when you're feeling weak, and just being very dialed in to how you're feeling, when you're triggered, if you're triggered, what your triggers are, avoiding them, navigating them, all that is it takes a lot of growth,
Yeah. For me,
and training.
it's been a gift of my recovery, because
Amazing.
I was not like this before. And truly,
Yeah,
it shows you that you are able, if a person wants to evolve and change their ways, they can. It just takes time and work.
absolutely. I think those are wise words, that if you put in the time and the work, you get the result. And it's a little bit of a cliche, but incredibly true. And you're a testament to that. So I really appreciate you taking some time to share with us your hard work and your effort, your resilience, your wisdom. It's certainly helpful and inspiring. And it's always great to see you. So thank you for taking some time to be here today. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I
Absolutely.
hope everyone out there, if anyone is going through anything, reach out for help, because you shouldn't be suffering alone in silence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that encouragement is huge. So thank you. Excellent conversation. Thank you very much, Lizzie, for joining us. I appreciate you being so vulnerable and forthcoming and honest. I'm sure it's not easy to discuss some of these topics, and I salute you for your courage and certainly the work that you're doing, which isn't easy. So I appreciate that, and I thank you. Thinking about this topic some more, discrimination and mental health, where we also see microaggression, which is a topic that has become popular over the last couple of years, where it's this kind of subtle discrimination and racism. What's important is that we have a lot of self awareness, and we're positioned in a way where we can cope with these situations. So, in order to do that, it's important for one to recognize what their triggers are and what situations they find triggering. Now, there's some people that already can answer this question. There's others that need to spend time figuring that out, being hyper aware to their surroundings and realizing when their mood or their emotions change in response to a certain stimulus. There are also individuals that have experienced generational trauma, where for years they come from a family that has dealt with various issues of racism and discrimination, and that adds an extra layer of complexity and context to the situation that should be recognized and acknowledged. But zooming out, I think the biggest takeaway is that self-awareness, where one is able to recognize how they feel and when they feel it and what they could do about it. When seeing a lot of social media of other people's suffering, it is very triggering. It's important to disconnect and take some time to focus on self-care and what that really means. And when there's situations where somebody is distressed because of other people's behavior, how does one navigate that? Right. And we see a lot of times now more than others, people talking about, well, use your coping skills and you have maladaptive coping skills. I'll tell you, as a clinician, I find both those terms really frustrating because yelling at someone to use your coping skills when you don't know what that even means doesn't help anybody. But let's stop with the fancy terminology for a second. If you have ways that you know you can feel better, that's a positive coping skill. If you have a way that makes you feel better temporarily, but then you feel worse, that's a maladaptive coping skill. So what you want to do is build an arsenal of skills and techniques and solutions that make you feel better in the long run. And if someone tells you use your coping skills, that's what they're talking about. That tap into that long list of things that make you feel better and it's sustainable versus things that are temporary and transient. So thinking about all this discrimination, anti-Semitism, and this episode happens to be about anti-Semitism, but I would say any form of discrimination probably triggers a lot of parallel thoughts and emotions to the things we discussed today. So navigating all that is important. And if anyone is listening and identifies with some of the topics we discussed, seeking support personally, social support, community support is very important. And seeking help overall and speaking to a mental health professional if you feel like this isn't something that you can navigate or you've tried and you find yourself struggling is certainly appropriate and encouraged. But one thing that I think a lot of people forget and might even feel counterintuitive is what we call in mental health behavioral activation, which is the idea of even if you don't want to go out and do something, you go out and you do it. And with compassion fatigue, that's very helpful, particularly if you're sitting home and you're scrolling through social media and you're tired and exhausted of seeing images that are emotionally taxing or disturbing. Putting your phone away, getting up and doing something that you previously used to enjoy, even if right now it doesn't feel right. If that means grabbing your guitar and playing it, if it's playing the piano, if it's going for a walk, if it's going for the gym, if it's doing yoga, whatever it is, activating that behavior, even if at first feels uncomfortable, has long-term positive consequences. And I would encourage everyone listening that if you identify with anything we talked about today, put everything away for a second, turn off the world and go do something and see how you feel. The beginning will be difficult. You won't want to do it at first. But if you continue reinforcing that behavior, research and studies have shown that it does yield positive results. So I wish that for everyone listening, and I appreciate everyone's attention. We had a really great conversation today. Lizzie, thank you very much for joining us. You're always welcome to come back. Again, I'm Dr. T with Candid Minds. Look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you for listening. Please follow us or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please follow us at Mindful Care and at TikTok Psychiatrist for more. And don't forget to rate and review.